Okay? Because I'm coming out of the NIV too. But there are two different versions of the NIV that are out there right now. There's the one that was released in 1984, which is the one that I read from most of the time. And I find that to be a little bit tighter on a few of the things in the text. And then they just re-released another version. I think it was 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. And some of that had to do with, if I understand this right, with parts of repackaging, part of the TNIV that didn't do as well. But I don't think that's the only thing involved with that. Anyway, so made obnoxious, realized they had become a stench, odious, Rhonda said. Whichever way we come about it, he done wrong. Joe, what does it say? We're all in the same ballpark here. This was a bad enough action that everybody was smelling it. This was like rotten eggs. Yeah. Yeah. And again, you see, we're using different English words to kind of revolve around the same idea. So whichever word you're using, I'm going to go back to just what's in my text. But when the Ammonites realized they had become a stench in David's nostrils, they hired 20,000 Aramean foot soldiers from Beth Rehob and Zobah, as well as the king of Makkah with 1,000 men, and also 12,000 men from Tob. So when your arguments run out, you grab your weapons, right? And that's really the only other option, because he holds on to his pride. He decides to hire them. And was anybody counting? We'll get to this later. 33,000, including the king of Makkah. So probably, I mean, he's got a small contingent. Who knows if he's actually leading much of anything here, but enough to where you're not going to just pass that by. Okay, 33,000 men is quite a bit. Yes, ma'am. Two chapters back in chapter 8. In fact, there's a whole discussion about this in the commentaries. Chapter 8, verse 9. Am I telling you this right? There's some commentaries that want to say that chapter 10 is an amplification of what happens in chapter 8. And that this happens a couple of times in 2 Samuel. Do you remember the time that we looked at the numbers and we had the one that said 7,000 and the other that said 1,700? And we said because of the wording there, it probably just got switched. The numbers here don't line up in that kind of way. Otherwise, you just say, yeah, this is an amplification of that. And part of their argument for it being more of the same story is Hadadezer, 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 5, who is the king of Zobah. Okay, so we've heard of them now in chapter 10 again. But also, he's involved in this whole narrative, though he doesn't show up in the battle here. Because David defeats him in chapter 8, either it's linear and we're encountering them again and we just didn't defeat them all the way, even though they were subject. They found the way to come back and basically bring more attacks against David. Or this is the same story and we're just amplifying a little bit more. The numbers are off. That's one of the things that makes it hard to see that. But later on, we'll actually pull something, and I think I'm going to give us a little bit more insight into David and Bathsheba from some of this thinking in a couple of weeks. We'll see. But basically, these people that they've gone to get, Beth Rehob, the king of Makkah, Zobah, and Tob, all of these seem to be the same players that we've dealt with in chapter 8 in one way or another. Tom, can you get us to the map, please? All right. So last time we talked about the Orange Kingdom of Ammon. That's where Hanun is from. And when he goes out and he hires people, he's basically hiring from the Teal Kingdom up here, the kingdom of Aram Damascus, or the Arameans. And there is so much about the Arameans that you won't get from just this package. The Jewish tradition has them as coming from Aram, the son of Shem, that would make Aram the grandson of Noah. And this is Genesis chapter 10, verse 22. But also in Judges 3, when Othniel defeats the forces holding Israel, they come from a place called Aram Naharaim, or Aram of the two rivers. And I was trying to track down both rivers. I'm not sure about the second one, but I know it's the Euphrates. I think the second one's the Tigris. But basically, the Arameans have a kingdom that stretches from what you see in the teal. That's Aram Damascus. There are more Arameans as you go east, and we'll actually bring those in as we go on. But the Arameans, in the course of their kingdom, reach as far as northern Iraq, and eventually they wind up conquering Nineveh before it's taken by somebody else later on. But just to show you from Judges 3 and Othniel, this is Judges 3, verse 7 through 11. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherahs. And the anger of the Lord burned against Israel so that he sold them into the hands of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram Naharaim. That's the Aram of the two rivers, the Arameans, to whom the Israelites were subject for 8 years. But when they cried out to the Lord, he raised up for them a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. This is the first judge. Verse 10, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. And the Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. So the land had peace for 40 years until Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. Okay, so we've seen these the Arameans appear before. They're polytheistic, which means they have many gods, but they also can be monolatristic, which is, again, big words. Basically, it means polytheism, where we have so many gods, but I'm only going to worship one of them. Okay, I'm going to pick one out of the whole group. So they like to do either we're worshiping everybody, or we're going to pick one out of the everybody, and we're just going to follow them, but we still consider every other one of the gods as a god. We're just putting our devotion to that one. It is monolatristic, monolatristic. So you have many gods, but you worship one. The language of the New Testament that Jesus speaks, Aramaic, comes from the Arameans. And from 1100 BC onwards, which is right before our story with David, they've been taking the territory that's called the Transjordan. It's basically going across the Jordan. So the 2.5 tribes that were on the eastern side of the Jordan, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, they've been encroaching into that territory as they've been going on. And I shared that they eventually conquered the city of Nineveh, which is modern-day Mosul, if you're familiar with the territory. Verse 6, Beth Rehob is at the foot of Mount Hermon near Dan, and it's part of the territory that had been awarded to the half-tribe of Manasseh. Deuteronomy 3, verses 8 through 9, and Joshua 12 and 13 talk about it being the northern border of the Ammonite kingdom, the orange one, before Joshua conquered it and gave it to the 2.5 tribes. So basically, the Israelites took that from them. The Arameans came back and took it back, or I should say they took it for themselves. And so the Ammonites at least aren't mad at the Arameans for taking their territory in the same kind of way. I mean, there's still the back and forth of all kingdoms, the times when kings go off to war. But at least they kind of have a common enemy here in the Israelites. And so Hanun, in his pride, reaches out to gain allies to himself instead of being humble and respecting David's hesed, and he goes to the Arameans because he thinks that they'll accept it, and they do. Also, notice that Hanun is actually the aggressor here. In fact, let me get back to my text. But Hanun is the one who has moved. David has told his ambassadors to stay home. And the Ammonites, when they realize that they've done this in this bad way, they go and hire them to the point where these 33,000 men show up on the scene. And verse 7, on hearing this, David responds by sending Joab out with the entire army. Notice he doesn't go himself, okay? And we're just going to put a pin in that for the moment. We'll come back to it later on, but I just want to bring it to your attention that David is staying home in a consistency that we'll see at the beginning of chapter 11 with David and Bathsheba, but that wasn't the first time that he did, and there's reason why. So he doesn't go himself. He sends Joab out with the entire army, and they march right up to the capital of the Ammonites, Rabbath Ammon right there. See it on the south side of the kingdom of Ammon with the star. He basically goes to their capital because 33,000 men, just the way that they've treated him, there's got to be a response. And so he sends Joab, and Joab goes. Verse 8, the Ammonites came out and drew up in battle formation at the entrance to their city gate. Okay, so these are the guys in orange that own this. They come out of their fortress and they array up for battle. Meanwhile, the Arameans of Zobah and Rehob and the men of Tob and Makkah were by themselves in the open country, which doesn't mean that they're out away somewhere. They're not in the city. They are outside the city walls. So verse 9, Joab saw that there were battle lines in front of him and behind him. In other words, it's a trap. They've tried to bring him in. They've hired these mercenaries. And when David's army shows up, they close the door and boom, they've got him on both sides. Okay? Because they want to win this by force in whatever way that they can. So the alliance between the Ammonites and the Arameans is a clever alliance of opportunity. It's literally concerned with gain of our three things that we said earlier. It's not about fear. It's not about love. It's about we're paying you so you can come help us. And it's not concerned with what's right. It's not concerned about the hesed that David was talking about. It's just concerned with we have the power to do this. And so we're going to stand in our pride and we're going to do what we want to do. And it rejects the relationship potential that David was offering with the Israelites to Hanun. And it's sad that he does. The second bond that I want to show you is actually the one coming up right here. And it's between Joab and Abishai. And we've encountered these two before. Joab and Abishai have a brother named Asiel. If you remember from 2 Samuel 2, the third brother was the fast one who caught up to Abner, and Abner killed him. And because of that, Joab swore that he would kill Abner, and eventually did in 2 Samuel 3, when Abner was going to give David the kingdom. Okay, we've covered this material. It's been a little while since we were there, but we know this story. These two men are both David's nephews. They're sons of his sister Zeruiah. But here in this story, instead of using their abilities for themselves, they're using it on behalf of Israel and David. So verse 9, Joab sees the battle lines drawn. He realizes he's in a trap. And he's not David. Nobody's singing songs about Joab has slain his tens of thousands. Okay? But his insight is why David has trusted Joab to be the commander of the army. And he shows what he can do here and why David has his trust in him in 6 different ways in verses 9 through 12. I'm going to read it, and then we're going to go over it together. Verse 9, Joab saw that there were battle lines in front of him and behind him. So he selected some of the best troops in Israel and deployed them against the Arameans. He put the rest of the men under the command of Abishai, his brother, and deployed them against the Ammonites. And Joab said, if the Arameans are too strong for me, then you are to come to my rescue. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I will come to rescue you. Be strong, and let us fight bravely for our people and for the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight. This is one of those glowing positive moments for Joab, where he really, if you don't have a whole murder otherwise of Abner, Joab might be put forward a little bit more as this is who you ought to be, especially here. If we just cut this story out and elevate it, Joab does 6 things here that are so good and so right. Number 1, verse 9, he knows how to identify the enemy. And you may think, well, duh, they're in front of you, they've got swords, they're trying to kill you, you're in a trap. 33,000 Arameans facing them from behind. We're not told how many of the Ammonites come out of the capital city to reinforce in front of their gates. But there's a lot of people here. And Joab not only knows who the enemy is, but number 2, he knows how to identify who he can trust. And this is verses 9 and 10. He knows he can trust the other Israelites that are with him, but he knows that he can trust his brother Abishai. Because the bond of brotherhood between them, it's not just blood is thicker than water. They've been in battle many times before. He knows that he can communicate with his brother, and his brother will carry out things in the way that he'll get it done in the right way. He can trust him. And so because of that, in this difficult situation with the entire army, he turns to his brother. Verse 10, and this is number 3, Joab takes on more of the burden himself than he gives to his brother. Okay, look back at verse 10. Joab put the rest, let's go back to verse 9. Joab saw there were battle lines in front of him and behind him, so he selected some of the best troops in Israel and deployed them against the Arameans. That's outside to those 33,000. He put the rest of the men under the command of Abishai, his brother, and deployed them against the Ammonites, against the city. So Joab's going to face the army that's outside with some hand-picked men. But everybody else he gives to his brother. And he says, you make sure that you handle your side, and if you can't, I'll help you. But me and these men, we're going to handle this side. Now, you may say, wait a minute. Joab picked the better trained guys, right? So is he really is he really giving his brother any kind of advantage here? What do you think? They've got a lot more numbers. Mm-hmm. Rhonda, did you have anything more? The training that's there, I think Joab is centering in the hope. In fact, not just the hope. I think he's seen this before. I think Joab knows that because these men are trained, they're going to do what he's asking them to do more quickly and more efficiently. And because of that, he can maneuver them to handle the guys in front of them, where the rest of the army, they're good, but they're not trained the same kind of way. So Joab can lean more on the men he's picked, say, let's do this, and I'll use my cunning, and we'll keep them away, and you can use brute force on your side and keep the Ammonites at bay in their city, and we'll work together. Number 4, he has his brother's back. This is verse 11. If the Arameans are too strong for me, you are to come to my rescue. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, I will come and rescue you. We're in this together. I mean, literally. This is about love between the two of them, but this is also about survival. They are caught in the middle of this pincer, and if they don't do this smartly, they're not going to get away. And the armies of Israel will be destroyed. So Joab says, hey, I trust you, and I know you've got my back, and I've got your back. Number 5, he then goes to explain to Abishai, to remind him. Because even though we know things, sometimes it's good just to be reminded, just to have that little bit of extra encouragement one way or another. He reminds Abishai they're fighting for their people, they're fighting for their cities, and they're fighting for their God. And number 6, and this is the most important part of it all, he centers himself on God's presence and provision. Verse 12. The Lord will do what is right in his sight. He doesn't say the battle belongs to the Lord. He doesn't say the outcome is in God's hands. He uses different words, but it's basically the same thought. Joab's foundation and bedrock is not the army, and it's not his brother, even though he trusts and loves his brother deeply. He trusts that God will do the thing that ought to be done. And that's everything else flows from that. And so with this, God gives them the victory. Look at verses 13 and 14. Then Joab and the troops with him advanced to fight the Arameans, the ones on the outside. And they fled before him. Handpicked troops, 33,000, and he doesn't even need his brother to come rescue him. God is with him and with them. And verse 14, when the Ammonites saw that the Arameans were fleeing, because Joab had broken their lines, Abishai hadn't gotten as far yet, but to be fair, there's a city backing up there, the Ammonites. When the Ammonites saw the Arameans were fleeing, they fled before Abishai and went inside the city. So Joab returned from fighting the Ammonites and came to Jerusalem. Okay? They break the trap, they get out of the trap, and they say, 2-to-1 odds are not what we want. Even trusting in God, there are just some situations you don't put yourself in twice. We're going back home. We're going to regroup. Joab is exactly the inspiration that we need for our battle against Satan. Because, church, we need to know how to identify who is our enemy and who is not. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 12. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Saul didn't understand this lesson. And so how many chapters did we have him chasing his brother David round and round and round and round because of jealousy and fear, instead of actually doing the work of God for their country and for the kingdom in that kind of way? Instead of the church doing the same thing and spending its effort where we argue with each other, our energy should be spent facing Satan instead. Number 2, do we know how to identify who we can trust like he did? Because God made us brothers and sisters in Christ for a reason. He put us in the church for a reason, for this time and this purpose and the things in this community or in the communities where we are that we face. For all of you watching on the live stream, whether you're in the United States or you're in a different country, God has put you in your church for the specific time that you are in right now. And he calls you and your church to respond to him through the Bible. He talks about unity, but he also talks about how we rely on one another and how the unity we have convinces the world that Jesus is the Son of God because of our love and because of how we move in him. Number 3, do we take more of the burden upon ourselves rather than asking others to do it? And let's be careful here. We're not saying that there aren't times that you can't accept help from other people, because you should. In fact, you go to Galatians 6, it says that we both carry our own loads and we help each other carry those loads. In the exact same passage, there is a unity of how we do it together. And there are going to be times when you accept more help than you give. But as a general rule, if you are trying to work to use what you have to the best of your ability and not just shift things on other people, but take responsibility, it becomes a blessing. Abishai's not the one who broke the lines in front of him. Joab did, even though he was in the weaker situation, because he knew what he could do with his talents and abilities, and he used them for the glory of God. Number 4, and this echoes out of Galatians 6 as well, but I literally took the things from Joab's list and just turned them into questions. Number 4, do we have our brothers and sisters back? Do we trust each other to the point where we are moving forward together, each one bearing their load and each one helping each other? Number 5, do we understand what we are fighting for? Because it's not, for them it was our people, our cities, our God. For Christians and Christianity in general, it is all people and all cities for the sake of our God. Because everyone who turns to him has the ability to be saved. Everyone who responds to the love of Jesus can come if they want to. And he knows who will. That's the whole predestination thing. He's already seen the movie. He knows who will say yes and who will say no. But you have the ability to respond to him and give him not only the yes of, will I accept Jesus as my Lord, but you then will give him the yes every day of, how much will I give him of myself? Part, none, or all that I am. Number 6, do we center ourselves on God's presence and his provision? If I was having you write something down on a card, either to memorize or just as encouragement to put up on your mirror or whatever it is, it would be this phrase that Joab utters here: the Lord will do what is right in his sight. He will lead forward. He will, if we stay with him and do what we should do to serve him, the rest of it takes care of itself on so many levels. But if we're not acting out of love, we're doing this for the wrong reasons. Colossians 3, verses 12 through 14. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion and kindness, humility and gentleness and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, verse 14, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. That was Colossians 3, 12 through 14. So the Ammonites and the Arameans are the first thing, the first alliance. We see the two of them tied together out of gain, out of greed, you could say in some ways. We see Joab and his brother Abishai bound together out of love and for the sake of what God called them to. Verses 15 through 18, we see the third group. Because Joab and Abishai go back, they tell what happened, and they say, David, we need you. And the motivation here is not only love, but it's also security. Where the mighty men usually acted as David's personal guard, when David sent the army, he didn't send them, as far as we can tell from the context. But here, and I'll read verses 15 through 18, David turns out all of Israel on top of the army, and they all go. Verse 15, after the Arameans saw they'd been routed by Israel, they regrouped. Hadadezer had Arameans brought from beyond the river. This is the Euphrates. So this is the eastern part that I was telling you about that eventually will go even as far as Iraq. Okay, he brought reinforcements from there. They went to Helam with Shobach, the commander of Hadadezer's army, leading them. So he not only sent reinforcements, he sent his general to say, you go take care of this. Verse 17. Oh, by the way, notice again, they make the aggressive move. David has to respond. Verse 17, when David was told of this, he gathered all Israel, crossed the Jordan, and went to Helam. The Arameans formed their battle lines to meet David and fought against him, but they fled before Israel. And David killed 700 of their charioteers and 40,000 of their foot soldiers, or horsemen, depending on how you translate it. He also struck down Shobach, the commander of their army, and he died there. So they come, again, this is almost, we're not going to be in the same situation again. And if you pick on one of us, you pick on all of us. But notice the reinforcements that come. This is more than what was there before. For them to lose 40,000 men, the reinforcements that came were more than the initial group that got hired to begin with from everywhere. We're not sure where Helam is, verse 16. We know it's across the Jordan. It's in the Transjordan area. But it's got to be somewhere that they can use chariots. That's about as much as the research has said. But the Arameans have been the aggressor. David responds. All of Israel comes. And where Joab isn't the general that David is, well, David is. And he takes care of what he needs to. And not only is this threat removed, but we get down, and the fourth group I want you to see is actually David and the Arameans. And it's not the one you're expecting. And the motivation here is out of fear. This is verse 19. When all the kings who were vassals of Hadadezer saw they'd been defeated by Israel, they made peace with the Israelites and became subject to them. And I love this last line. So the Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites anymore. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. But instead of eliminating them, which he could have, David could have just done an edge of the sword kind of campaign, and this been done as much as he could. But David makes peace with the kings who were vassals to Hadadezer. See this? And their motivation for making peace with David is fear. What's David's motivation, church? What has David's motivation been from verse 1? Serve God, love, Hesed, the restoring peace that he had with the king before. That's what he's operating in. He has been accused wrongly. He's been accused wrongly of what he's done. He has been humiliated in front of other people, and his response is to stay to God and what God leads him to do. And so when he comes to use the power that he has, he uses it in love, in restoring, in a positive way. They still become his vassals. Yes, we're at the time. They still become his vassals, but in the kind of way where we've seen him deal with other groups in much bloodier ways than this. But we had two people that this situation had led us that they were having to deal with. We had Ammon and we had the Arameans. And now there's only one, because David has stepped in to deal with this. Next week, we're going to have the singing night. So 2 weeks from now, we're there. We're going to step into 2 Samuel chapter 11. Or at least we're going to step into the story of David and Bathsheba. I don't think you're going to see which way I come to it to begin with. But I hope it gives you some insight to why some of it happens the way that it does. But just remember, the whole context of this is in the story of this fight and the back and forth and how this is happening from this young king's rebellion and why he doesn't do the things he ought to do. Any questions or comments you all have about this before we wrap up? Tom, Leon is the one who is set for the prayer. If you'll bring him the microphone. So the Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites anymore because the Lord will do what he wills to do, what is right in his sight. Leon, lead us to the throne of God, please.
Father, we thank you for your son coming down across for our sin. Thank you for your son raising from the dead to the assembly back in there. We, we thank you. We thank you for waking us up this morning. We thank you. Thank you for the church. Bless the church. So now it will grow strong. We love each other more. Bless those that sick in the hospital, nursing home. Bless them, Alan, Father. Bless Alan. Bless those now in Florida with flood. Thank you for my wife. Let her continue to see. Let her continue to that. Forgive us our sin. We all have sinned. Came short of God. We love you. This is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
No, I think I'm going to ask Elijah to do it.